you can get a sense of a religious or spiritual tradition by the way in which adherents to that tradition greet each other. Pressing their palms together with a slight bow, a Hindu from Calcutta says Namaste. The good in me bows to the good in you. An adherent of Jainism from the Gujarat says Jai Jindra. May the enlightened life reside in you. The wordless bow of the Japanese practitioner of Zen Buddhism means the Buddha nature in me honors the Buddha nature in you. The Punjabi from the Punjabi Sikh says Sat Shri Akal, meaning God is the greatest truth. The Baha'i in Shiraz says Allah Aboha, which means glorious God. A Jew in Haifa greets with the Hebrew word for peace, shalom. Shalom Aleichem, peace to you. And the response is Aleichem Shalom, and to you peace. A Muslim in Jakarta greets with the Arabic word for peace, salam, assalamu alaikum, peace to you. And the response is alaikum salam, and to you peace. And a Christian in Buenos Aires, likely to be a Catholic, says que el Señor esté con ustedes, which means the Lord be with you. And the response is y también con ustedes, and also with you. The Lord be with you, and also with you. Bishop Thomas Gumbleton, formerly the Roman Catholic Bishop of Detroit, was noted for his work on behalf of peace. And on an occasion like this, when he was to give a keynote speech, he was introduced, and when he came to the podium, before beginning his remarks with this traditional Catholic greeting of the Lord be with you, he tried to adjust the microphone. And you know how sometimes when you do that, it squeaks and squawks, and there was this jarring blast of feedback. He looked at the microphone and he muttered, "There's something wrong with this." And with one voice, the audience replied, "And also with you." Sadly, this is part of religion as well. Instead of greeting each other and treating each other with the respect and regard taught and exhorted by our traditions, many times we say to each other, "There's something wrong with you." And typically the response is, "And also with you." Of course, there are many other divides out there on the basis of which we say there's something wrong with you. There's something wrong with the color of your skin. There's something wrong with the rung on the socioeconomic ladder that you occupy. There's something wrong with the neighborhood you live in, the orientation of your sexuality, your gender, your age, your ethnicity. Now, none of this is inevitable. These differences do not necessarily, in and of themselves, lead to this divide. It is a matter of the choices we make as individuals. It's a matter of the choices we make collectively as a society. Ultimately, this divide between peace be with you and there's something wrong with you resides somewhere much deeper in the human heart. My friends, the pivotal and perennial question is this: do I treat you a certain way based on who you are or based on who I am? Do I, Dirk Ficca, as a Christian, call upon the Lord to be with you only if you are a Christian, and not if you're a Muslim or Jew or Buddhist or humanist? Or do I treat you the same, regardless of who you are, because I am a follower of Jesus of Nazareth, who taught me to love my neighbor? Do you, on election day, as a citizen of South Africa, vote for the African National Congress or the Democratic Alliance or the Inkatha Freedom Party or the Freedom Front because your chosen party and their leadership will look out for your personal interests and those like you? Or do you vote because this particular political party and their leadership will look out for the common good and for the well-being of all citizens of South Africa, regardless of their political affiliations? The inspiration for tonight's gathering, hosted by the Turquoise Harmony Institute, is an aging Islamic scholar from Turkey named Fethullah Gulen, who today lives in 2 rooms in a modest house in eastern Pennsylvania in the United States, where he prays, teaches, writes, and worries about the world. Fittingly, the movement he has spawned does not formally bear his name, but the Turkish word that captures its essence, hizmet, meaning service. Inspired by the Hizmet movement, millions of people are serving humanity around the world. But long before there was a global Hizmet movement, in his early days as an itinerant imam in the city of Izmir in Turkey, Fethullah Gulen focused on young people and their education. Along with his duties for leading daily prayers at the mosque and delivering the sermon for the Juma observance on Friday, and provided after-school tutoring programs and summer camps in math and science for high school-age students studying for the university exams. Mr. Gulen focused his attention on those students who lived in rural areas and who tended to come from socially and religiously conservative families. Students who did not possess the financial resources or the social standing needed to obtain the kind of education necessary to pass the entrance exam and then to move on to the university level, in contrast to children in secular and predominantly wealthy families living in the cities. In Izmir, these were students attending the Imam Hatip School, which taught both a standard liberal arts curriculum but also offered religious instruction. To help these students succeed, Mr. Gulen approached local middle-class businessmen to build a dormitory in which these rural students could live during the week in order to take full advantage of every educational opportunity available. In 1976, the very first educational dormitory associated with the Hizmet movement was completed. And at the grand opening, Mr. Gulen issued a rather remarkable challenge to these businessmen. He said, "You have built this first dormitory to serve Imam Hatip students. But how many Imam Hatip schools do we have in Izmir? Just one. And how many students will attend it? 125. But do you think your job is done by building this one dormitory? Because there is only one Imam Hatip school? No. How many other schools do we have next door to the Imam Hatip school in Izmir? 50 high schools. You must build 50 more dormitories for students in all these other 50 schools. And if you have not done that, you have not fulfilled your responsibility." For Fethullah Gulen, the aim was to mobilize the community to provide educational opportunities for all young people without discrimination. And that meant not limited to the Imam Hatip students receiving religious education. He was challenging those businessmen with a religious conscience to provide for students of all backgrounds, regardless of their religious identity. And he has continued to challenge all those associated with the Hizmet movement to do the same ever since. Nearly 50 years later, there are now over 2,000 such schools and universities in 150 countries, part of a movement that provides humanitarian aid, fosters intercultural and interreligious dialogue and cooperation, pursues conflict resolution, cultivates social entrepreneurism, and promotes public discourse and civic engagement for the common good. One of those Hizmet schools, Horizon International High, is right here in Johannesburg. In 2004, Kangalani Mulani became a student there. As he tells it, he was first shocked by the white people who served as his teachers, who cared so much for African students. Over time, he was impressed by the willingness of these teachers to tutor with students long after school hours, to visit with their parents, to take these students into their own homes and to mentor them. As he puts it, this was the first time I witnessed white people coming not to take, but to give back. Kangalani describes his education not only in terms of academics, but more so as an education for life. During weekly conversations called sopets, over supper in the homes of his teachers, for the first time he learned about what those in the Hizmet movement call universal values. Values such as love and tolerance, the respect for mothers and fathers, the respect for humanity and all life, the personal practice of morality, humility, and prudence, the cultivation of personal character and virtue. Values he saw being lived out in the lives of his teachers. Kangalani remembers the day he was announced as the top student in his 9th grade. Thrilled by the honor, he invited his friends to his house to celebrate, but on the way home was hit by a car. He was discharged from the hospital and spent a week at home recovering. On that Saturday morning, while lying on the couch, he heard the gate opening and saw his mother get up to greet the visitors. When she opened the door, she saw 2 white people along with an African. It was his teachers and one of the mentors from the dormitory coming for a visit. His mother was so emotional she couldn't help but cry. It was the first time a white person had visited their home with such good intentions. And Kangalani was touched as well. During his studies at Horizon, Kangalani developed a special bond with his Turkish language teacher, who became his mentor and guide, his spiritual father and brother. His teacher's wife and 2 daughters welcomed him into their family, calling him Abi, brother, giving him a special sense of belonging. And it was at his teacher's urging that he decided after graduation to return home and to serve his own people. Based on his academic record, Kangalani was given the opportunity to study in Turkey. Though he had always wanted to be a doctor, he felt a need to touch more lives than 30 or 40 patients a day. With a growing passion for education, he decided to become a teacher. Having graduated in 2013, he is back at Horizon, teaching physics, mentoring students, working in the community, giving back. It's not easy, he says, but we all have our part to play. It is impossible for just one of us to save the world, but if everyone plays their part, it becomes like a puzzle with the pieces fitting together. This was the lesson I learned from my teachers and elder Abis. Now I choose to carry on that torch. The pivotal and perennial question is this: do I treat you a certain way based on who you are or based on who I am? From humble beginnings in the backwater of Turkey to his revered status as Hoca Efendi, Fethullah Gulen has answered that question this way: you must not only greet your Muslim sisters and brothers with salam, with peace, but all those you meet, Muslim and non-Muslim alike, and work on their behalf because you are a follower of Islam. This stance of unconditional regard for the other is the legacy of Madiba as well. You know, in the years leading up to the 1999 Parliament in the World's Religions, held here in South Africa, which I helped to organize, I made many trips from Chicago to Cape Town, where it was held. I remember a particular conversation with an Afrikaner taxi driver traveling in from the airport, past the townships, around the base of Table Mountain, looking down on the empty space that was once District 6. "I'm not fond of this new dispensation," the taxi driver was saying. "I long for the days of apartheid, when this country was run by my people, was run the right way. But I have to admit," he said, "that Mandela, he is a saint." Indeed, he was. Imprisoned as a freedom fighter on behalf of millions of oppressed South Africans, with every reason to be bitter and to seek to mistreat those who had mistreated him and those like him, Mandela chose another way. Resentment, he said, is like drinking poison and then hoping it will kill your enemies. Mandela emerged after a 27-year stint at Robben Island, the spiritual leader of an entire nation and the first African president of South Africa. He worked tirelessly on behalf of all concerned, black, white, and colored, poor and middle class and well off, Christian, Muslim, Jewish, and traditional. Do I treat you a certain way based on who you are or based on who I am? For Mandela, the answer to that question meant striving to build a just and peaceful society. For he said, "For to be free is not merely to cast off one's own chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others." But now, with the passing of Madiba, there is a certain nervousness in South Africa. Will the radically egalitarian principle he used in forging the new dispensation be cast aside by those who follow him? Might the radically egalitarian spirit he embodied, which was the glue that held the country together, might that die with his death? Was Mandela the only one who could hold things together? That now each new election will mean simply one self-serving group following another. That people will turn on each other. That the best and the brightest any vibrant society needs to survive and thrive will leave. That racism will return with a vengeance. That the scourge of apartheid, meaning literally aparthood, in familiar and new forms, once again dominate the country. Let's not have any illusions about such an everyone for themselves approach. So much of the world operates on this basis, everyone for themselves, and we see the results. Partisan politics promotes leaders seeking to rule, not to govern. The market economy may drive technological innovation, but it will never guarantee human rights. The law of supply and demand may set the price of bread, but it will not put bread on the table for everyone. When everyone is only out for themselves, there will be aparthood, with winners and losers, with the privileged and the excluded, with those few who have more than enough, and those many who may not even get by. In contrast, the foundation of any just and peaceful society rests on the golden rule of do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It rests on the principle of reciprocity, leading to the establishment of the common good in all who participate. One way to test the soundness of any society is to use the ethical thought experiment suggested by the moral philosophy John Rawls. He says this, it's very simple. He says, set up any system you want, but do so with the knowledge that tomorrow you may find yourself in a different place in it. That's an interesting experiment, isn't it? Set up any political system you like with the knowledge that tomorrow you may not belong to the party that is in power and will be at the mercy of those who are. Set up any economic system you like with the knowledge that tomorrow you may be in the elite 1% that owns 40% of the world's wealth, or in the 40% of the world's population that lives on $2 a day. Set up any healthcare system you want with the knowledge that if it does not cover everybody, tomorrow you might find yourself with no place to take your sick child or spouse or elderly parent for medical care. The bedrock of a just and peaceful society is this notion of a common good available to everyone based on the principle of reciprocity. But I'm here to tell you tonight, in order to get to such a just and peaceful society, even reciprocity is not enough. Something else is needed. There is equality, but equality does not always bring justice. Something more is needed. There is peace that is merely the absence of conflict, but that may not guarantee the presence of harmony. Something more is needed, and that something more is the unconditional regard for the other. That I will accord you respect and work for your well-being unconditionally, regardless of who you are. That I will accord you respect and work for your well-being unconditionally, regardless of whether you do the same for me. At their best, our religious and spiritual and humanistic traditions have it in us to cultivate such unconditional regard for each other. Two brothers, one a bachelor, the other married, owned a farm whose fertile soil yielded an abundance of grain. Half the grain went to one brother, and half the grain went to the other. All went well at first, but then every now and then the married man began to wake up in the middle of the night and think, this isn't fair. My brother isn't married, he's all alone, and he only gets half of the produce of the farm. Here I am with my wife and my 5 children, so I have all the security I need in my old age. But who will care for my poor brother when he gets old? He needs to save much more for the future than he does at the present, so his need is obviously greater than mine. And out of his concern for his brother, he would get up out of his bed, go into his barn, fill up a sack of grain, sneak over and pour the grain into his brother's barn. The bachelor brother, too, began to wake up in the middle of the night. And every once in a while, he would wake up and say, this isn't fair. My brother has a wife and 5 kids to take care of, and he only gets half of the produce of the land. Now, I have no one except myself to support. So is it just that my poor brother, whose need is obviously greater than mine, should receive exactly as much as I do? So then he would get out of bed and go into his barn and fill up a sack of grain and sneak it over and put it into his brother's barn. For years they did this, and mysteriously the grain in their barns never went down. One night, they got out of bed at the exact same time and ran into each other, each carrying a sack of grain on his back. Many years later, after their death, this story leaked out. So when the townsfolk wanted to build a church, they chose the spot at which those two brothers met that night, for they could not think of any place in that town that was more sacred than that one. My friends, how can we make all of South Africa sacred ground? How can we as a world come to treat each other with the same unconditional regard as those two brothers? We have the inspiring examples of Madiba and Kangalani. We have the best teachings and practices of our religious and spiritual and humanistic traditions. We have a model in the Hizmet movement. We have the spirit and the purpose that has called us here together tonight. Is it a question of what we should do or why we should do it? Or is it a question of who will do it? Peace be with you.